Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night at the local time. And first we're going to talk about Kharkiv direction. We have a lot of interesting details from different sources, and according to information we have, according to Ukrainian sources, according to their intelligence, they managed to, let's say, calculate and to count and to geolocate most of the forces that currently located on the border with Ukraine, and Ukrainians, let's say, classified the Russian group of forces in three groups. There is going to be group of forces Bryansk, group of forces Kursk, and group of forces Belgorod. As you can see, every single group has the title of the region where this or that, let's say, unit will be deployed. The Ukrainians are saying that there are going to be around 50,000 soldiers, and let's say from on Bryansk direction there are going to be 8.5 thousand soldiers, on Kursk direction there are going to be 10.8 thousand soldiers, and on Belgorod direction, and the direction in front of Kharkiv, there are going to be 31.2 thousand soldiers. Also, the Russians have already concentrated up to 400 tanks, 130 armored vehicles, 990 artillery systems, including the 120 multiple launch rocket systems. So we can say that this group of forces, let's say, is not enough. The number of soldiers and forces in this group of forces is not enough to establish control neither over Sumy or Kharkiv. Of course, we understand this, but also we understand that this group of forces is enough to create a buffer zone. So according to different sources, the Russians are planning to create up to 10 kilometers line, let's say, along the border, and this will allow the Russians to reduce the bombardments and attacks on the Russian territory. Furthermore, the Russians, when talking about Kharkiv area, will be able to get as close as possible to Kharkiv, and the Russian artillery forces will get possibilities to start bombing the eastern and the northern, let's say, outskirts of Kharkiv itself. So this is like one of the reasons why the Russians are pushing to start bombing and start counterattacking the Ukrainians inside of the Kharkiv. This is the first thing. The second thing, when talking about the number of forces, of course, it's not enough to establish control over Kharkiv, but when talking about any other Russian operation, we haven't seen, let's say, concentration of 100,000 soldiers of any direction. The first Russian tactics is to break through the fence belt and to get as close as possible to the town, to the this or that settlement. And as soon as the Russian troopers reach this or that town, only then the Russians start concentrating the forces. So most likely the main target or the main purpose of that first wave of attack, of this first wave of forces, 50,000, is to get closer to Sumy, maybe to reach the outskirts but not to enter, maybe to reach the outskirts of Kharkiv but not to enter, and many other towns and settlements in the direction. And after, as soon as they enter, the Russians will concentrate another group of forces with another goals. Furthermore, according to information we have, the commander of this group of forces north is going to be the General Colonel Alexander Lapin. So this is the photo of him in Kursk, somewhere in the headquarters, where he was talking with different officers, so on. And once again, according to Ukrainian sources, the Russian offensive should start somewhere after 15th of May. So that was stated by the commander of 92nd Mechanized Brigade, Storm Brigade of Armored Forces of Ukraine. And he also stated, stated a lot of panic things, that the Russians are going to attack in the middle of May. And also he reported about the situation in Konstantinovka and the Chasiv Yar. He stated that if Ukraine lose Chasiv Yar, Konstantinovka and Drushkovka, then the Ukrainians would be able to stop the Russians just along Dnipro River, but it's just a little bit later. Also, would like to discuss with you another important topic. So we understand the Russian plans, what the Russians are doing, how the Russians are going to do this. The question is what the Ukrainians and how the Ukrainians are planning to prevent any Russian offensive. So on this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions along the border. So we can see another tree line, and this another tree line has rich network of fortifications around one trenches, another trenches, another trenches, and big trenches that connected one side. We see from this angle, it's even better to see significant number of fortifications around this tree line. So you might say, so, but what is so special in this video? There's like trenches all over the entire territory of Ukraine. It's not something unique. There are a lot of them. And you know, there is a very interesting, let's say, situation that I would like to point your attention to. Well, let's zoom in better once again. to this video, to this let's say area. And once again, if we turn on the video, we're going to see significant number of fortification. This is a, but let's increase the numbers of this since the beginning of May. And as you can see, since the beginning of May, there were lots of, let's say, videos from this direction. Let's take a look at the video that was published on the 2nd of May, so which probably took place on the 1st of May. The same trenches, the same fortification, the same tree line, more precisely, was under very heavy fire of Russian FAB, but I would like to point your attention that there are no trenches around this tree line. So this is the most important. So just for 10 days, the Ukrainians managed to create significant number of fortifications just around this one tree line. They managed to, let's move a little bit back. The Ukrainians managed to connect this tree line and this tree line with a network of fortifications. They created significant number of fortifications around this tree line just in 1 week, just in 8 days and 9-10 days. So this that means that Ukrainians are in a very hurry. Ukrainians obviously know for sure where exactly the Russians are going to attack, where the Russians have concentrated their forces, and the speed that the level of speed, the speed that Ukrainians are building fortifications, of course, is amazing, and of course they continue doing this. And of course, currently the time works plays not in Russian favor, because just in 10 days they managed to create a single tree line among the fields in a very powerful fortification belt that obviously would be very difficult to bypass for the Russian forces. Now let's move further to the situation on the ground. The Russians continue bombing the borderlands, and today we got probably the first report since the beginning of this entire situation with Kharkiv that the Russians launched an artillery preparation. Now let's move to Kupin's direction. The sources reported that Ukrainians have arrested the commanders and the officers of 110th Brigade of Territory Defense, who basically abandoned their positions in Kislovka and Kotlarovka without showing any resistance. And now there is, like, as you can see, another wave of purges in Ukrainian military, and this is very important for the Ukrainians because they understand that soon the Russians can launch a very big offensive operation in Kharkiv direction. So that's why they need to be 100% sure that Ukrainians will not run away as soon as they see Russian tanks. So that's why they want to, let's say, to scare the Ukrainian officers and to force them to fight till the last soldier. So at least something like this. We haven't received anything from Kremenaya Forest, nothing as well from Siver's direction, a few updates from Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, but the most important, we have already discussed that the forces of 92nd Brigade says that if Ukraine lose Konstantinovka and Drushkovka, the next barrier where the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians is Dnipro River. Now we're moving to Bakhmut, to Avdiivka direction. We have additional updates. During the previous night, during this night, we got more updates about the Russian offensive. And currently, the Russians are not planning to stop their movements towards Novoalexandrovka. The Russians are not going to stop their offensive towards Sokol, and the Russians are making more and more attempts to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter Novopokrovskaya. The Ukrainian sources published today the video of a very powerful Russian attack with the use of significant number of armored vehicles, completely armored and well fortified. The Ukrainians were attacking and bombing the Russian forces, dealing the Russians significant damage. Most likely that attack was repelled or at least slowed down by the Russians, but anyway, we see that most of the Russian attacks currently are heading towards the second, let's say, artillery pocket that located between Umansk and Novosilovka-Persha. So now the Russians mainly are focused to attack this territory based on the geolocations we're receiving. So this is now their primary target, and it's like we can understand this, because if the Russians take control of this territory, both the northern, let's say, artillery pocket and the southern artillery pocket may collapse automatically. Furthermore, the Russians continue conducting effective artillery duels. On this video, we can see a few more artillery systems of the armored forces of Ukraine were destroyed as a result of Russian counter-attacks. So, which also confirms that the Russians are pushing to the west, not to the north, but mainly to the west, not in direction of New York, Donetsk, but in direction of, let's say, Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Furthermore, we got additional updates about the situation on the line Umanska and Itailova, and according to pro-neutral mappers, the Russians managed to physically cut the road between Yasnobrodovka and Itailova itself, and if we summarize everything, this is approximately the Russian control on the territory, so which confirms that the situation in Ukrainian side very poor, and that this foothold is about to fall. And another video of Ukrainian, let's say, armored vehicle who was trying to maybe counterattack attack or to evacuate the Ukrainians was destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strike. After a very long operational pause, we start receiving additional updates on the south Donetsk direction in the vicinity of Novomikhailivka, Konstantinovka. The Russians made more attempts to attack Konstantinovka, lots of geolocations of FPV drone strikes, so there was a very long operational pause, if you remember. Let's say 1 or 2 weeks, there were no activity, almost no activity from the Russian side. And after that pause, the Russians renewed their offensive, renewed their FPV drone strikes, the Russians renewed their, let's say, hunting after the Ukrainian artillery forces. So we can make a conclusion that the Russians started the Konstantinovka offensive operation, or the Russians entered the active phase of this operation. So we'll see what is going to be next, but the operation has begun. Few words about Krasnogorovka itself. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the hospital. They took under control additional buildings, some high-rise building in the area, as you can see. 2 or 3 buildings were captured by the Russians and got, let's say, right to the walls of the hospital. So the cauldron and the news is tightening of the eastern flank, and most likely the Ukrainians, if they're still able to evacuate and abandon their positions, they are going to do this during the next 24 hours. South Donetsk direction Vremivka tactical bridge had no update, and we got significant number of details from Robotyne. A lot of FPV drone strikes along the, let's say, main supply roads. The Russians destroyed significant number of maybe reserves or reinforcements that Ukrainians were trying to send to the south in Robotyne with the purpose to stabilize the situation. A lot of FPV drone strikes along the main supply road that Ukrainians use for the deployment of forces. And the most important thing that, based on all these videos, as you can see, the Ukrainians are not moving along this road on their vehicles. They are moving like on their own feet, which confirms that Ukrainians either abandoning their positions or that they decided to leave Robotyne without clashes, because we have just a lot of videos of just strikes on Ukrainians who are moving here without anything. So most likely the battle for Robotyne will be ended also by the end of May, and then the Russians will be interested to see what they are going to do next. Continue moving further or they will stop. We got more update from Ladizhin power plant. Today the satellite pictures were published where we can see that the power plant was also destroyed completely, and the Ukrainians are no longer available to use this power plant in the full scale. So this is the situation. Interesting detail about the Zelensky himself. According to information we have, Zelensky dismissed the head of his, let's say, security service, the man who is responsible, his main bodyguard. And the reason is that there were soldiers and people and officers among the bodyguards who were serving on the Russian army, and they were preparing the assassination of him. So this is the situation. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.